The auction block stank of tobacco spit and desperate men. Ethan Cross stood at the back of the crowd, hat pulled low, trying to make himself invisible. Didn't work. Never did. In a town like Salvation Ridge, everybody knew everybody's business, and his business was failure. 3 years of drought had turned his ranch into a graveyard of dust and dead cattle. The bank was circling. His neighbors whispered. And here he was, spending his last 2 coins on something even more foolish than hope. A wife. The auctioneer was a fat man with a voice like gravel grinding glass. He stood on a makeshift platform outside the territorial courthouse, flanked by a dozen women who'd come west on promises that turned to lies. Mail-order brides with no husbands waiting, widows with no prospects, girls sold by families who couldn't feed them. All of them lined up like livestock, eyes down, hands folded.
Lot 17, the auctioneer bellowed. Miss Lydia Vale, age 26, educated, no family, no children. Starting bid, $10. The crowd barely stirred. Ethan caught a glimpse of her through the shifting bodies, tall, thin, dark hair pulled back severe. Her dress was faded blue, mended at the sleeves. She didn't look at anyone, just stared straight ahead like she was somewhere else entirely. $10, gentlemen. A fine woman, able-bodied.
She looks half dead, someone called out. Laughter rippled through the crowd. The auctioneer's smile tightened. $8 then. Come now. I wouldn't pay 8 cents. More laughter. Ethan watched her face. Nothing. Not a flinch, not a tear. Just that 1,000-yard stare, like she'd already died inside and was waiting for her body to catch up. He knew that look. Wore it himself most days. $5. The auctioneer was sweating now. Surely someone... $2. The words came out of Ethan's mouth before his brain caught up. The crowd turned. He felt their eyes like hot coals. $2? The auctioneer squinted at him. Mr. Cross, is it? That's insulting. It's all I got. Ethan pulled the coins from his pocket, held them up. They caught the afternoon light, gleaming dull silver against his calloused palm. $2. Take it or send her back wherever she came from. The auctioneer looked at the woman. She looked back at him, still expressionless. The man sighed. Sold. $2 to Mr. Ethan Cross. May the union be blessed and fruitful. He said it like a curse. The crowd parted as Ethan walked forward. He could hear them muttering, "Desperate fool, throwing good money after bad. She'll be dead in a month." He ignored them. Ignored everything except putting one foot in front of the other until he reached the platform. Up close, she was even thinner than he'd thought. Wrists like bird bones, shadows under her eyes. But those eyes, sharp and clear, pale gray like winter ice, they fixed on him without fear or hope, just cold assessment. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Yes." "Can you work?" "Yes." "Can you shoot?" She paused. "If I have to." "Good enough." He turned to the auctioneer. "We done here? Sign the certificate and she's yours." The man thrust a paper at him, ink still wet. Ethan scrawled his name. The woman, Lydia, signed below it in neat, careful script. Her handwriting was better than his. "Congratulations," the auctioneer said flatly. "Next lot." Ethan offered his arm. Lydia stared at it for a moment, then took it. Her grip was light, barely there. They walked through the crowd together, and the whispers followed them like flies. His horse was tied outside the saloon, a big roan gelding, one of the only things he hadn't sold yet. Lydia looked at it, then at him. "I can ride behind," she said. "Suit yourself." He swung up into the saddle, offered his hand. She took it, pulled herself up with surprising strength, settled behind him without a word. Her hands rested lightly on his waist. Proper. Distant. "Hold on," he said, and kicked the horse into a trot. They rode out of Salvation Ridge in silence. The ranch sat in a valley between 2 ridges of scrub pine and rock. It had a name once, the Triple Crown, but the sign had fallen years ago, and Ethan never bothered to fix it. Why bother? A name didn't change what a place was. What it was, dying. The main house was a 2-room cabin with a stone chimney and a roof that leaked when it rained. The barn listed to one side, missing half its shingles. The corral fence was more gaps than rails. And the land, 60 acres of brown grass and dust, stretching away under a sky so big it hurt to look at. Lydia took it all in without comment as they rode up. When Ethan dismounted, she slid down on her own, landing light as a cat. "This is it," he said. Felt the need to say something, though he didn't know why. "Not much, but it's paid for, mostly." "The barn needs work," she said. "Yeah." "The well?" "Still good. Water's clean." "Livestock?" 6 head of cattle, chickens. Used to have more." He didn't elaborate. She didn't ask. She walked toward the house, slow, taking everything in. Ethan followed, suddenly aware of how it must look. The peeling paint, the broken step, the door that hung crooked on its hinges. He'd stopped seeing it years ago, stopped caring. Now, watching her see it, the shame crept back in. Inside was worse, dust everywhere, dishes piled in the basin, his bedroll in the corner, never made. The stove cold and crusted with old grease. It smelled like stale smoke and loneliness. Lydia stood in the center of the room, hands folded, taking inventory. "When did your wife leave?" she asked. Ethan stiffened. "What makes you think—" "There's lace on the window, hooks on the wall where pans used to hang. A woman lived here once." She turned to face him. "When did she leave?" 2 years ago. His voice came out rougher than he meant. "Went back east. Couldn't take the cold, the work, He gestured vaguely at everything. "Any of it." "Did she take the pans?" "Yeah," Lydia nodded, like that made sense. "I'll need supplies. Flour, salt, lard, soap, fabric if there's money for it. Needles and thread at minimum." "There's no money." "Then I'll make do." She unpinned her bonnet, set it on the table. Her hair was darker than he'd thought, almost black, shot through with early gray. "Which room is mine?" Ethan pointed to the door on the left. "That one. I'll take the other." She nodded, opened the door, looked inside. Ethan had cleaned it out after Sarah left, stripped the bed, emptied the trunk, scrubbed it down like he could scrub away the memory. But the room still felt haunted. "Thank you," Lydia said quietly, and closed the door. Ethan stood there for a moment, alone in the main room, listening to her move around on the other side of the wall. Then he went outside to tend the horse. They didn't speak much that first week. Lydia rose before dawn, started the fire, made coffee from grounds Ethan had been reusing for 3 days. She cooked what little there was: beans, cornmeal, dried meat tough as boot leather. She scrubbed the dishes, swept the floors, mended the tears in his spare shirt without being asked. She worked with the focused intensity of someone trying to outrun their own thoughts. Ethan watched her, wary, waiting for the complaints, the tears, the demands to be taken back to town. They never came. Instead, on the 3rd day, she asked to see the ranch's books. "Books?" He almost laughed. "I don't keep books." "How do you track expenses?" "I don't." "Revenue?" "What revenue?" She stared at him. "You're running a ranch with no records?" "I'm running a ranch into the ground," he said flatly. "Don't need records to know that. Show me everything. Debts, assets, agreements, all of it." He almost refused. Pride, maybe, or shame, hard to tell the difference anymore. But something in her eyes made him relent. That cold, clear focus, like she saw a problem that needed solving and emotion didn't enter into it. So he showed her the stack of notices from the bank, payments missed, extensions denied, the contract with the regional cattle buyer, Cornelius Vance, that locked him into selling at whatever price Vance set, the water rights he'd signed away during the drought, not realizing what he was giving up, the feed bills, the supply debts, the taxes he couldn't pay. Lydia read through it all at the kitchen table, her face unreadable. When she finished, she set the papers down in a neat stack. "You owe $600. $627. He'd memorized the number. It haunted his sleep. "And your assets?" 6 cows, some chickens, 60 acres, a broken-down house, and a wife I bought for $2. He said it harsh, testing her, waiting for her to break. She didn't. "The land's worth more than you think. The grazing rights you signed away, that was a mistake. But it's fixable. And this contract with Vance," she tapped the paper, "it's exploitative, but not ironclad. There are loopholes. Loopholes don't help when there's no cattle to sell. Then we get more cattle. With what money? We don't buy them. We catch them." Ethan blinked. "Catch them?" "Wild cattle, mavericks. There are still herds running loose in the high country, aren't there? Leftovers from failed ranches, drives that went wrong, no brands, no owners, free for the taking. That's dangerous work. Men die up there. Men die down here too, just slower. She looked at him. You have nothing to lose. He wanted to argue, wanted to tell her she was crazy, that it wouldn't work, that they'd both end up dead in a ravine somewhere. But he couldn't, because she was right. He had nothing to lose. All right, he said, we'll try. They rode into the high country at first light. Ethan hadn't been up this way in over a year, not since the drought broke and he'd been too broke to afford the ammunition for hunting. The land rose in steep ridges of pine and granite, cut through with narrow valleys where water still ran cold and clear. Elk trails threaded through the underbrush. Bearscat marked the territory. And somewhere up here, if the stories were true, wild cattle still roamed. Lydia rode beside him on a borrowed horse, a sway-backed mare from the neighbor who'd felt sorry enough to lend it. She sat the saddle easy, didn't complain about the pace or the terrain, just kept her eyes moving, watching everything. You grew up around horses, Ethan said. Not a question. Yes. Where? Virginia. Before the war. He waited, but she didn't elaborate. After a while he asked, What happened to your family? They died. The flatness of it shut him up. They rode in silence for another hour, climbing higher until the trees opened onto a meadow of tall grass still green from spring runoff. And there, grazing in the morning mist, were the cattle. Maybe 20 head. Longhorns mostly, with a few Herefords mixed in. Rangy, wild-eyed, horns like spears. They raised their heads as Ethan and Lydia approached, muscles tensing. We can't take all of them, Lydia said quietly. Pick the strongest, the ones that'll survive the drive down. Drive. Ethan stared at her. We can't drive them. It takes a crew. It takes 2 people who don't quit. She pulled the rope from her saddle. You take the left flank. I'll take the right. Push them toward the valley trail, slow and steady. Don't spook them. This is insane. Yes. She looked at him, and for the first time he saw something in her eyes that wasn't cold. A spark. Almost a smile. But you already said yes. She kicked her horse forward before he could respond. What followed was 3 hours of chaos. The cattle scattered, regrouped, scattered again. One big longhorn bull charged Ethan's horse, nearly goring the gelding's flank before Ethan fired a shot over its head and drove it back. Lydia roped a steer and was dragged 15 feet before her horse dug in and stopped it. They sweated, cursed, bled from thorns and branches. Ethan's shoulder screamed where he'd torn it years ago. Lydia's face went pale as chalk, but she didn't slow down. And slowly, painfully, they started to move the herd. By the time they reached the valley trail, they had 12 head. Not the 20 they'd hoped for, but 12 more than they'd had that morning. The cattle moved in a ragged line, nervous, ready to bolt at any sound. Ethan and Lydia rode behind them, exhausted, barely staying in the saddle. That, Ethan said, when he could finally breathe again, was the stupidest thing I've ever done. You're welcome, Lydia said. He looked at her, face streaked with dirt, hair falling loose from its pins, a cut on her cheek from a low branch, and laughed. Actually laughed, for the first time in longer than he could remember. She didn't laugh, but the corner of her mouth twitched. It was a start. Word got around fast. By the time they drove the cattle into the ranch corral, half the valley knew about it. Ethan could feel the eyes on them as they worked, neighbors watching from a distance, judging, waiting to see if he'd fail again. One of them rode up as Ethan was nailing the corral rails back into place. Hank Mercer, a barrel-chested man with a beard like steel wool and a ranch twice the size of Ethan's. He sat his horse easy, chewing a wad of tobacco. Heard you went maverick hunting, Hank said. Ethan didn't look up. Heard right. That's dangerous work. Man could get killed. Could. Hank spat into the dust. Could also get robbed. Lots of folks would say those cattle belong to whoever lost them first. Lots of folks can take it up with me if they want. Ethan straightened, hammer in hand. You one of them? Hank studied him for a long moment. Then he grinned. Hell no. I think it's about time somebody in this valley showed some spine. He tipped his hat toward Lydia, who was working on the far side of the corral. She your doing? She's her own doing. Well, she's got grit, more than most men I know. Hank gathered his reins. You need help, Cross. You let me know. Not charity, just neighbors helping neighbors. Way it used to be. He rode off before Ethan could respond. Lydia walked over, wiping her hands on her skirt. Who was that? Hank Mercer. Owns the spread north of here. Friend? Maybe. Hard to tell anymore. Ethan looked at the cattle milling in the corral. 12 head. It wasn't much, but it was something. You think this'll work? Really? I think, Lydia said slowly, that if we sell these cattle to Vance, we'll get just enough to keep him quiet for a month, maybe 2. That's what I figured. But if we bypass him, drive them to the railhead in Helena ourselves, we could get triple the price, maybe more. Ethan stared at her. Helena's 150 miles, through the mountains. That's a 2-week drive with a full crew. We're 2 people. Yes. Vance owns this territory. He finds out we're cutting him out. He'll come after us. Yes. We could lose everything. We already have nothing. Lydia met his eyes. So what's there to lose? He wanted to say safety, security, the little bit of peace that came from keeping your head down and not making waves. But she was right. He'd lost all that already. Lost it the day Sarah left, maybe before. All he had now was the choice between dying slow or dying fast. Might as well die trying. All right, he said. Helena, it is. They spent the next week preparing. Lydia went through the ranch with a ruthlessness that bordered on brutal, selling or trading everything that wasn't nailed down. The spare saddle. The good rifle Ethan had been saving for emergencies. Sarah's lace curtains. The silver spoon that had been his mother's. Every time Ethan started to protest, she'd fix him with that ice-gray stare and say, Do you want to eat or do you want keepsakes? He shut up. With the money, she bought supplies. Flour, hardtack, salt pork, ammunition. She mended their clothes, reinforced the saddles, sharpened every blade they owned. She worked from before dawn until after dark. Methodical and relentless, like a general preparing for war. Ethan worked the cattle. 12 head wasn't much, but they were wild and unpredictable. He spent days just getting them used to being handled, moving them around the corral, teaching them to respond to pressure without bolting. His body ached, his hands bled. But slowly, the herd started to settle. On the 6th day, a rider came. Ethan was in the corral when he heard the hoofbeats. He looked up to see a man on a black horse, dressed too fine for ranch work, pressed suit, polished boots, a hat that cost more than Ethan made in a year. Behind him rode 2 men with guns on their hips and eyes like dead fish. Cornelius Vance. Ethan climbed out of the corral, wiped his hands on his pants. Lydia emerged from the house, drying her hands on her apron. She stopped when she saw Vance, but didn't retreat. Mr. Cross, Vance said, tipping his hat. His voice was smooth as oil. I heard a rumor I thought couldn't possibly be true. But here you are, with a whole new herd. They're mine, Ethan said, legal and clean. Oh, I don't doubt that. Mavericks, I assume. Smart. Risky, but smart. Vance smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. Of course, our contract stipulates that any cattle sold from this ranch go through me first, at the agreed-upon rate. That contract's for cattle I already own. These are new stock. The contract says any cattle originating from this property. Vance pulled a folded paper from his coat, held it up. I had my lawyer look it over. Very clear. Ethan's jaw tightened. He'd never read the contract that carefully. Couldn't, really, with his poor reading. He'd trusted Vance's word when they'd shaken on it. Stupid. So damn stupid. I'm not selling to you, Ethan said. Then you're in breach of contract. I can take you to court. Tie you up for years. Cost you everything. Vance's smile widened. Or we can be reasonable. I'll take the cattle off your hands right now. $20 a head. That's generous, considering. They're worth 3 times that in Helena. Helena's a long way away. Lots of things can happen on a drive like that. Vance glanced at his men. Accidents, thieves, stampedes. Be a shame if you lost everything trying to be a hero. The threat hung in the air like smoke. Lydia stepped forward. Mr. Vance, is it? Vance turned to her, eyebrows raised. And you are? His wife? Ah, the auction bride. I heard about that. $2, wasn't it? He chuckled.
Must be true love.
Lydia didn't react. You're right that the contract is binding, but only if the cattle originated from this property. These cattle were captured on open range, in the high country. That's federal land. They became our property the moment we claimed them, before they ever touched this ranch. Vance's smile thinned. That's a creative interpretation. It's the law. If you'd like to dispute it, we can go to the territorial judge. She paused. Of course, that would require admitting that you've been using contracts like this to corner the market on cattle sales in 3 counties. The federal government takes a dim view of monopolistic practices. Silence. Vance stared at her. His men shifted in their saddles. Ethan held his breath. Then Vance laughed, a short, sharp bark. Well, you're smarter than you look, Mrs. Cross, I'll give you that. He folded the contract, tucked it away. But smart doesn't keep you alive out here. You make an enemy of me, you'll regret it. We'll take our chances, Lydia said. Vance's face hardened. Yes, I expect you will. He turned his horse. Good luck with your drive, Mr. Cross. You're going to need it. He rode away, his men following. They didn't look back. Ethan exhaled, realized he'd been holding his breath. That was dangerous, Lydia finished, but necessary. He was going to bleed us dry one way or another. At least this way, we control our own fate. He's going to come after us. I know. He could kill us. Yes. She looked at him. Are you afraid? Ethan thought about it. The honest answer was yes, he was terrified. But there was something else underneath the fear, something he hadn't felt in years. Alive. Yeah, he said, but I'm going anyway. Lydia nodded. Then we leave at dawn. They drove the cattle out as the sun broke over the ridge, 12 head moving slow through the valley, toward the mountains and the long road to Helena. Ethan rode point, Lydia at the rear, both of them scanning the ridgelines for trouble. The cattle were skittish, the air cold, the sky threatening rain. It should have felt impossible. Instead, it felt like the first honest thing Ethan had done in years. As they climbed into the foothills, Lydia rode up beside him. She didn't say anything, just rode there, steady and solid, her eyes on the trail ahead. And Ethan realized something. He'd bought her for $2, a bargain nobody else wanted. But somewhere between that auction block and this moment, she'd stopped being a purchase and started being a partner. He didn't know if that was enough to save them, but it was a start. The mountains rose ahead, jagged and unforgiving. The cattle lowed and stamped. And Ethan Cross, broke and desperate and half crazy with hope, rode toward a future that might kill him, or might just save his life. The first day on the trail, everything that could go wrong did. 2 miles out from the ranch, one of the longhorn steers decided it had seen enough of civilization and bolted straight into a thicket of scrub oak. Took Ethan an hour to dig it out, and when he finally did, the animal came out fighting, nearly hooking his horse's belly with those wicked horns. By the time he got the steer back with the herd, his shirt was torn and he was bleeding from a dozen scratches. Lydia watched from her position at the rear, didn't say a word, just kept the rest of the cattle moving. Around noon, the sky opened up. Not a gentle rain, a downpour that turned the trail into a river of mud within minutes. The cattle balked, tried to turn back. Ethan's horse slipped twice, nearly went down. Water ran off the brim of his hat and sheets, blinding him. He could barely see Lydia through the gray curtain of rain, just a dark shape on horseback, moving through the storm like a ghost. They pushed on because there was nowhere to stop. The trail here was narrow, hemmed in by steep banks on both sides. If they halted, the cattle would bunch up, panic, maybe stampede. So they kept moving, foot by miserable foot, until the trail widened into a small clearing and the rain finally eased to a drizzle. Ethan dismounted, legs shaking. His boots squelched in the mud. Every part of him hurt. Lydia rode up, water streaming from her hair. Her face was pale, lips almost blue from the cold, but her eyes were still sharp. "We need to stop for the night," she said. "It's only mid-afternoon. The cattle are exhausted, so are we. Push them any further and we'll lose them." She looked around the clearing. "There's shelter under those trees, enough grass to keep them happy. We can build a fire, dry out." Ethan wanted to argue. They'd only covered maybe 8 miles. At this rate, it would take them 3 weeks to reach Helena, not 2. But one look at the cattle told him she was right. They stood with their heads down, sides heaving, done for the day. All right, he said, we camp here. Setting up camp in the wet was its own kind of hell. Everything was soaked. Their bedrolls, the kindling, even the matches had gotten damp. Lydia managed to coax a fire to life using bark she peeled from a dead pine and some patience that bordered on supernatural. Ethan unsaddled the horses, rubbed them down as best he could, then collapsed by the fire. For a long time, they just sat there, not talking. The fire crackled and hissed, sending up plumes of smoke that smelled like wet wood and resignation. The cattle settled in the clearing, chewing cud, oblivious to the misery of their human captors. First day, Ethan said finally, and we barely made it 10 miles. 8, Lydia corrected. She was wringing out her hair, twisting it into a rope. Maybe 8.5. At this rate, we'll get faster. The cattle will settle. The trail will improve. She said it flat, like she was reading facts from a ledger. But only if we don't kill ourselves on day 1. Ethan looked at her across the fire. She was shivering, he realized, trying to hide it, but shivering all the same. Her dress clung to her thin frame, soaked through. If she caught pneumonia out here, she'd die. Simple as that. You should change, he said, into something dry. I don't have anything dry. Then get as close to the fire as you can. He stopped, suddenly awkward. They were married on paper, but that was all. Strangers sharing a surname. I'll turn around, give you some privacy. She looked at him for a moment, something unreadable in her expression. Then she nodded. Thank you. He turned his back, stared out into the darkening woods, heard the rustle of wet fabric, the soft sounds of her moving. Tried not to think about it. Failed. You can look now, she said after a while. He turned. She'd draped her dress over a rock near the fire and wrapped herself in a saddle blanket. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. She sat close to the flames, arms wrapped around her knees, still shivering. Come here, Ethan said, before he could think better of it. She hesitated. Just to share the warmth, he added quickly. Nothing else. After a moment, she moved closer, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. He could feel the cold radiating off her, could hear her teeth chattering despite her best efforts to stay quiet. You did good today, he said. I fell off my horse twice. I didn't see that. Because you were too busy getting dragged through the bushes by that steer. The corner of her mouth twitched, almost a smile. We're not very good at this. No, he agreed. We're terrible. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the fire pop and the cattle shift in the darkness. Slowly, Lydia stopped shivering. Her breathing evened out. Ethan realized she'd fallen asleep, her head drooping toward his shoulder. He didn't move, didn't want to wake her. So he just sat there, keeping the fire fed, watching the stars come out between the clouds, and wondering what the hell he'd gotten them into. Morning came cold and gray. Ethan woke to find Lydia already up, her dress dry enough to wear, coffee brewing over the rebuilt fire. She handed him a cup without a word. How long you been awake? He asked. An hour, maybe 2. She looked tired, dark circles under her eyes. Couldn't sleep. Worried? Always. She poured herself coffee, sat down across from him. I was thinking about Vance. What about him? He's not going to let us just walk away. That threat he made, it wasn't empty. She stared into her cup. Men like him don't lose. They can't afford to. If we succeed, it sends a message to every other rancher he's squeezing. They might start to think they can fight back too. So what do? We assume he's already planning something. Sabotage, most likely. He'll try to scatter the herd or slow us down or make it look like an accident. She looked up at him. We need to be ready. Ready how? Sleep light. Keep the cattle close. Don't trust anyone we meet on the trail. She paused. And if it comes to a fight, we fight to win. Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. You ever kill a man? No. Her voice was quiet. But I watched men die. During the war, after it. I know what it looks like. She met his eyes. Do you? He thought about lying, but what was the point? Yeah, I know. She nodded, didn't ask for details. Just finished her coffee and stood. We should move. We've got ground to cover. They were on the trail by sunrise. The cattle were sluggish after the rain, but they moved. 8 miles that day, 10 the next. 12 the day after that, as the herd finally started to understand the rhythm of the drive and the trail dried out enough to make decent time. The land changed as they climbed higher into the mountains. The scrub gave way to tall pines that blocked out the sun. The air thinned, got colder. At night, frost formed on their bedrolls and they woke shivering, huddled as close to the fire as they dared. On the fourth day, they met another traveler. He came riding down the trail just after noon, a weathered man on a mule, leading a pack horse loaded with furs. Trapper, by the look of him. He raised a hand in greeting as he approached. "Afternoon," he called. "That's a fair herd you got there." Ethan positioned his horse between the man and Lydia. "Fair enough? Heading to Helena?" "Maybe." The trapper grinned, showing gaps where teeth used to be. "No need to be cagey, friend. I'm just making conversation. Name's Doyle. Been running these mountains for 20 years. Ethan Cross. This is my wife, Lydia." Doyle tipped his hat to her. "Ma'am? Hell of a thing, running cattle through this country. Most folks use the Valley Road." "Valley Road's longer," Lydia said. "Also safer. This trail you're on gets rough up ahead, real rough. Narrow passes, loose rock. One wrong step and you'll lose half your herd down a cliff." He scratched his beard. "Course, if you know what you're doing, it's passable. Just need to be careful." "Appreciate the warning," Ethan said. Doyle nodded, started to ride past. Then he paused, turned back. "One more thing. Saw some men camped about 5 miles north of here. 3 of them looked like hired guns. They asked me if I'd seen any cattle drives coming through." Ethan's hand moved toward the rifle on his saddle. "What'd you tell them?" "Told them I hadn't seen nothing, because I hadn't. Not yet." Doyle met his eyes. "But I'm guessing they're looking for someone. Might want to keep your eyes open." "We will. Good luck to you both." Doyle rode on, his mule's hooves clopping against the stones. Lydia waited until he was out of earshot. "Vance's men." "Yeah. They're ahead of us. That means they know which trail we're on." She looked at Ethan. "They'll set up somewhere we can't avoid. An ambush. So we turn back. Take the Valley Road, like Doyle said. That adds a week to the journey. We'll run out of supplies. And Vance probably has men watching that route too." She was quiet for a moment, thinking. "We keep going, but we're ready for them." That night they made a cold camp. No fire, no hot food. They took turns keeping watch, 2-hour shifts that felt like 10. Ethan sat with his rifle across his knees, listening to every sound in the darkness. An owl hooted. Something rustled in the underbrush. The cattle shifted and lowed softly. Every noise felt like a threat. When Lydia woke him for his turn to sleep, he almost refused. But exhaustion won out. He lay down on his bedroll, the rifle beside him, and drifted into a restless sleep full of shadows and gunshots. He woke to Lydia shaking his shoulder, her hand over his mouth. "Quiet," she whispered. "Someone's out there." Ethan's heart slammed against his ribs. He grabbed the rifle, sat up slowly. The sky was just starting to lighten, dawn maybe 30 minutes away. The cattle were restless, ears up, staring toward the tree line. "Where?" he breathed. "North side. I saw movement. At least 2 people, maybe more." They crouched behind a fallen log, watching. The woods were still dark, full of shapes that could have been men or just trees. Ethan's finger rested on the trigger, palms sweating despite the cold. Then he saw it. A figure moving between the pines, slow and deliberate. Then another. They were circling the camp, trying to get behind the cattle. "They're going to scatter them," Lydia whispered. "How many?" "I count 3. Could be more." Ethan made a decision. "Stay here. If shooting starts, get behind the horses and stay down." "What are you going to do?" "Stop them." He moved before she could argue, keeping low, using the trees for cover. His heart hammered so hard he thought it might burst. Hadn't been in a fight in years, wasn't even sure he remembered how. But some things you don't forget. He came up behind the first man, young, maybe 20, with a pistol in his hand and his attention on the cattle. Ethan reversed the rifle, swung the stock hard into the back of the man's head. The man dropped like a stone. Gunshot. The crack split the morning air. Ethan dove behind a tree as the bullet whined past his ear. Another shot, then another. The cattle, spooked, started to scatter. He could hear them crashing through the underbrush, Lydia shouting, trying to turn them. He fired back blindly, just trying to keep the shooters pinned. Heard someone curse, footsteps running. He leaned out, saw a man sprinting toward the horses. Ethan aimed, fired. The man stumbled, went down clutching his leg. Then something hit him from behind and he went sprawling. His rifle flew out of his hands. He rolled, saw a big man standing over him, pistol aimed at his face. "Should have stayed home, Cross," the man said. The gunshot sounded like the end of the world. But it wasn't Ethan who got shot. The big man's eyes went wide. He looked down at the red stain spreading across his chest, then at Lydia standing 10 feet away with a smoking pistol in her hands. He opened his mouth to say something, but only blood came out. Then he fell. Silence. Ethan lay there in the dirt, ears ringing, trying to process what just happened. Lydia walked over, the pistol still in her hand, her face white as milk. "Are you hurt?" she asked. "No, He looked at the dead man. "You killed him." "Yes." Her voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. "I told you, if it comes to a fight, we fight to win." The man Ethan had shot in the leg was trying to crawl away. Ethan got up, retrieved his rifle, walked over and put his boot on the man's back. "Who sent you?" he demanded. "Go to hell." Ethan pressed harder. The man screamed. "Who sent you?" "Vance! Vance sent us! He paid us $50 to scatter your herd and make sure you didn't reach Helena." The words came out in a rush. "That's all I know, I swear." "How many more?" "Just us three, I swear to—" He screamed again as Ethan put more weight on the wound. "If you're lying, I'll find you, understand?" "I'm not lying, please." Ethan stepped back. The man scrambled away, half running, half crawling into the woods. Let him go. He wasn't the real problem. The real problem was that they'd lost half the cattle. It took them the rest of the day to round up the scattered herd. They found 8 head by mid-afternoon, hiding in a narrow ravine. 2 more at dusk, grazing near a stream. The last 2 were just gone, either run too far to track or fallen down a cliff in their panic. 10 cattle left, out of 12. They made camp that night in a different spot, miles from the ambush site. Built a fire because they were too cold and too tired to care about being seen. Ate beans straight from the can because neither of them had the energy to cook. Ethan watched Lydia across the flames. She hadn't said much since the shooting, just worked in silence, moving the cattle, setting up camp, going through the motions like a sleepwalker. "You all right?" he asked. "I killed a man today." She said it flat, like she was talking about the weather. "I put a bullet in his chest and watched him die." "He would have killed me." "I know. Doesn't change what I did." She stared into the fire. "I thought I'd feel different, guilty, maybe, or scared, but I just feel tired." "That's normal." "How would you know?" "Because I've been there." Ethan poked at the fire with a stick. "During the war, after, I've killed men, and yeah, the first time you expect it to change you, break you, but mostly you just feel tired." She looked at him. "Does it get easier?" "No, it just gets more familiar." He paused. "For what it's worth, you saved my life. I won't forget that." "I didn't do it for gratitude." "I know. You did it because it needed doing." He met her eyes. "That's who you are. Someone who does what needs doing, even when it's hard, even when it costs." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "We lost 2 cattle. That's $600 at Helena prices. Leave it to Lydia to turn grief into mathematics." "Could be worse," Ethan said. "Could have lost them all. Vance will try again. Probably. We need a plan. I'm open to suggestions." She pulled out the map they'd been using, a rough sketch Ethan had drawn based on memory and stories from other drovers. She studied it in the firelight, tracing the trail with one finger. "We're here," she said, pointing. "About 40 miles from Helena. If we push hard, we can make it in 3 days, 4 at most." "That's hard on the cattle." "The cattle are already exhausted. So are we. But if we keep the current pace, we're giving Vance more time to organize another attack. Better to move fast, take him by surprise. What if we run into another ambush? Then we fight. Again." She folded the map. "But we don't stop. We don't turn back. We push until we reach Helena, or we die trying." Ethan looked at her. This woman he'd bought for $2, who'd killed a man that morning without flinching, and realized he'd never met anyone stronger in his life. "All right," he said. "We push."
They drove the cattle hard the next day. 15 miles, more than they'd done any day so far. The animals protested, tried to slow down, but Ethan and Lydia were relentless. Keep moving. Don't stop. Don't think. Just move. Around midday, they passed through a narrow canyon with walls that rose straight up on both sides. Perfect ambush country. Ethan's hand never left his rifle. Every shadow looked like a gunman. Every sound was a threat. But no attack came. They emerged on the other side into open country, rolling hills dotted with sage and juniper. The mountains were behind them now. Ahead, the land flattened out toward the plains and the distant city. "We're going to make it," Lydia said. She sounded surprised. "Don't jinx it." But for the first time since they'd left the ranch, Ethan let himself believe it might be true. They might actually pull this off. That night they camped in a grove of cottonwoods near a creek. The cattle drank their fill and settled down with almost no fuss. Even the horses seemed more relaxed. Ethan allowed himself a full night's sleep for the first time in days. He woke to the smell of smoke, not campfire smoke, something harsher, more acrid. He sat up, heart racing, and saw it. A glow on the horizon, maybe a mile away. Too big to be a campfire. Too bright. Fire. Lydia was already up, staring at the glow. "The grass is burning." "How?" "Does it matter?" She turned to him, and in the firelight he could see the fear in her eyes. Real fear, for the first time since he'd known her. "If that fire reaches the creek, we're trapped. The cattle, the horses, everything." They could hear it now, a distant roar like an approaching storm. The cattle heard it too. They were on their feet, stamping, starting to panic. "We have to move," Ethan said. "Now." They saddled the horses in seconds, didn't bother with the bedrolls or supplies. Just grabbed what they could carry and started driving the cattle away from the fire, toward the north. But the fire was faster. It came over the hills like a living thing, a wall of orange and red that consumed everything in its path. The wind drove it forward, whipping the flames higher. Embers rained down around them. The air filled with smoke so thick Ethan could barely see Lydia on the other side of the herd. The cattle stampeded. There was no controlling them, no turning them. They just ran, blind with terror, and all Ethan and Lydia could do was run with them and pray they didn't fall. His horse was screaming, fighting the bit, desperate to turn and flee. He held on with everything he had. They ran for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The fire chased them, always just behind, close enough that Ethan could feel the heat on his back. His lungs burned. His eyes streamed tears from the smoke. He couldn't see Lydia anymore. Couldn't see anything except orange light and darkness and the shapes of cattle running. Then, suddenly, they were through. The fire hit the creek behind them and stopped, the flames dying at the water's edge. The cattle slowed, milling in confusion. Ethan pulled his horse to a stop, gasping for air, and looked around wildly. "Lydia!" he shouted. "Lydia!" "Here!" Her voice came from his left, weak but alive. She rode out of the smoke, her face black with soot, coughing hard. "I'm here." They sat on their horses in the darkness, shaking, while the fire burned itself out behind them. When dawn came, they counted the cattle. 7 left. They'd lost 3 more in the stampede. And when Lydia checked their supplies, her face went pale. "The food," she said. "We left it at camp. All we have is what's in the saddlebags." Ethan checked. 2 cans of beans, some hardtack, a handful of coffee, maybe enough for one day if they stretched it. "How far to Helena?" he asked. 30 miles. Maybe a little more." "Can we make it in one day?" She looked at the exhausted cattle, the worn-out horses. "If we kill ourselves trying, then I guess that's what we do." They pushed on. No rest, no food except a few bites of hardtack each. They drove the cattle at a punishing pace, ignoring their own exhaustion, ignoring everything except the need to keep moving forward. By afternoon, Ethan was seeing double. His hands were numb on the reins. His body moved on instinct, barely conscious. Beside him, Lydia looked like a ghost, hollow-eyed, swaying in the saddle. "Talk to me," he said. "Keep me awake." "What should I talk about?" "Anything. Your life before. Your family." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "My father owned a plantation, tobacco. We had 60 people working the fields." She paused. "Slaves." Ethan glanced at her.
She was staring straight ahead, face unreadable. When the war came, my father joined the Confederate Army, got himself killed in the first year. My mother died of fever the year after. The plantation was seized, the workers freed. I was 18, alone, with nothing. She took a breath. I tried to make it work, hired freedmen as paid labor, but I didn't know what I was doing. The crop failed. The debt piled up. Within 2 years, I'd lost everything. What'd you do?
Survived? Barely.
Her voice was flat. I worked as a seamstress, a cook, a school teacher in a town so small it didn't have a name. Saved every penny. Tried to build something, but the world doesn't want women to build things. It wants us to be wives, mothers, property. She looked at him. So I decided to be property. On my terms. That's why I went to the auction. It was the only choice I had left. I'm sorry, Ethan said. Don't be. I'm not. She straightened in the saddle. That life taught me something important. The world is rigged. The system is designed to keep people like us, people with nothing, in our place. But it's not perfect. There are cracks, loopholes, ways to fight back if you're smart enough and desperate enough. She smiled, grim. And I'm both. Before Ethan could respond, he saw it. A smudge on the horizon, buildings, smoke from chimneys, the glint of railroad tracks in the afternoon sun. Helena. They'd made it. The cattle yards on the edge of town were chaos, pens full of bawling animals, drovers shouting, buyers walking the rows with clipboards. Ethan and Lydia drove their 7 head into an empty pen, dismounted on legs that barely held them, and just stood there for a moment, too tired to think. A man in a suit approached. You folks looking to sell? Yeah, Ethan managed. The man looked at the cattle, made notes. They're in rough shape. Been through hell by the look of it. You could say that. I can offer $40 a head. That's fair considering. Ethan was too tired to argue, but Lydia wasn't. 60, she said. The man laughed. Lady, these animals are half dead. They're healthy longhorns with good muscle. They'll gain back their weight in a week, 60, or we take them to the next buyer. The man studied her. Then he shrugged. All right, 60. But that's my final offer. We'll take it. He counted out the money, $420 in cash. More money than Ethan had seen in 3 years. He stared at it in his hands, unable to believe it was real. Lydia took her half, folded it carefully, tucked it into her dress. We need to settle the debt with the bank, then supplies for the trip home. Then we sleep, Ethan said, for about 3 days. She actually smiled, a real smile, tired and worn, but genuine. Deal. They found a boarding house on the edge of town, paid for a week, even though they only planned to stay 2 days. The room was small, with 1 bed and a wash basin. They stood there awkwardly, looking at it. I can sleep on the floor, Ethan offered. Don't be stupid. We just drove cattle through a fire. I think we can share a bed without scandal. She sat down heavily, pulled off her boots. Besides, I'm too tired to care about propriety. Ethan lay down on the far side of the bed, fully clothed. Lydia lay beside him, leaving a careful gap between them. For a while, they just stared at the ceiling. We did it, Ethan said quietly. We survived, Lydia corrected. That's not the same as winning. What do you mean? Vance is still out there, still powerful. We embarrassed him, but we didn't beat him. He'll come after us again, harder next time. She turned her head to look at him. This was just the first battle. The war's not over. Then we'll fight the next battle when it comes. Together? Yeah, Ethan said. Together. She was quiet. Then, so softly he almost didn't hear it, thank you for not giving up on me. You saved my life. Twice. I should be thanking you. You gave me a chance when nobody else would. That's worth more than you know. They lay in silence after that. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle blew. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. The world kept turning. And Ethan Cross, lying beside a woman who'd killed a man to save him, felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. They slept for 16 hours straight. When Ethan finally woke, the sun was already high, and his body felt like it had been beaten with hammers. Every muscle screamed. His hands were so stiff he could barely make a fist. But he was alive, and that counted for something. Lydia was already up, sitting by the window in her chemise and skirt, hair loose around her shoulders. She was counting money, organizing it into neat stacks on the small table. 420 from the cattle, she said without looking up. Minus 30 for the room and supplies. Minus another 50 we'll need for the trip back. That leaves 340. Ethan sat up, wincing. We owe the bank 600. I know, which means we need to make another run. Soon. She finally looked at him. But first we need to deal with Vance. Deal with him how?
I've been thinking about that. She stood, started pacing. Even exhausted and half-dressed, she moved like someone planning a battle. He tried to stop us 3 times. Hired guns, sabotage, that fire. That wasn't an accident, by the way. Someone set it. You sure? Grass fires don't start themselves in the middle of the night with no lightning. She crossed her arms. He's spending money to keep us down. A lot of money, which means we're hurting him more than we thought.
Or he's just that vindictive. Maybe both. She stopped pacing, faced him. But here's what I realized. He's operating in the shadows because he can't afford to be exposed. If people knew he was hiring gunmen to sabotage competitors, it would destroy his reputation. The territorial government might even investigate. So we expose him. We can't prove anything. It's our word against his, and he's a wealthy businessman. We're nobodies. She sat down across from him. But we can hurt him another way. We can break his monopoly. Ethan waited. There are at least 24 small ranchers in the valley who are trapped in contracts like yours, Lydia continued, forced to sell to Vance at whatever price he sets. If we can convince them to band together, pool their cattle, and make one big drive to Helena, they could bypass Vance entirely. They're scared of him. They are. But they're also desperate. And we just proved it can be done. We survived ambushes, fire, and a stampede with just 2 people and 7 cattle. Imagine what 30 ranchers could do with 300 head and a real plan. Ethan rubbed his face, trying to think through the fog in his brain. Vance will fight back. Harder than before. Let him. If he attacks a group that large, it won't be quiet. People will notice. The law will get involved. She leaned forward. Right now, he wins because we're all isolated, alone. But if we stand together, he can't crush us all at once. Ethan nodded slowly. It might work. It has to work. Because if we go back to the ranch with $340 and no plan, we'll be right back where we started in 6 months, broke and desperate. Her eyes were fierce. I didn't kill a man just to end up in the same place I started. Ethan looked at her. Really looked. This woman who'd been sold at auction like livestock, who'd lost everything before she was 20, who'd walked through fire and bullets without breaking. She was right. Going back to survive wasn't enough. They needed to win. All right, he said, let's do it. They spent 2 days in Helena preparing. First stop was the land office, where they filed a formal complaint about Vance's monopolistic contracts. The clerk, a bored man with ink-stained fingers, barely looked up. You got proof of coercion? He asked. The contracts speak for themselves, Lydia said, pushing their copy across the desk. Exclusive selling rights with no termination clause. Fixed prices regardless of market rate. It's illegal under the Territorial Commerce Act of 1868. The clerk actually looked up at that. You read the Commerce Act? I read everything. She tapped the contract. File the complaint. Put it on record. Even if nothing comes of it now, it establishes a paper trail. The man shrugged, stamped the complaint, filed it in a drawer that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. But it was done. On record. A small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Next, they visited the newspaper office. The Helena Independent was a 4-page weekly run by a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret Shaw, who looked like she'd seen everything twice and believed none of it. You want me to write a story about cattle contracts? She laughed, not unkindly. That'll sell papers. It will if you frame it right, Lydia said. Local ranchers being squeezed by a corrupt businessman, small farmers fighting back against the system. People love that story. People love that story when it's got proof. You got proof? Lydia pulled out a folder she'd been compiling. Copies of contracts from other ranchers she'd talked to over the years, price records showing Vance's rates versus market rates, testimonies she'd written down and had signed. Margaret flipped through it, eyebrows rising. Where'd you get all this? I pay attention. Margaret studied her for a long moment. Then she smiled. I like you. All right, I'll run something, but I'm not promising it'll change anything. Vance has friends, powerful friends.
Just plant the seed, Lydia said.
That's all we need. The story ran 3 days later, buried on page 3 under the headline, Questions Raised About Valley Cattle Contracts. It wasn't much, but it was something. They bought supplies for the trip home, food, ammunition, medicine. Ethan wanted to buy Lydia a new dress, something that wasn't worn to threads, but she refused. Save the money, she said. We'll need every penny. You deserve something nice. I deserve to not lose the ranch. But she softened slightly. Maybe after we've paid off the bank. They left Helena on a gray morning, riding slowly to save the horse's strength. The trip back took 5 days, longer than the rush there, but they weren't being chased anymore. Just 2 people on tired horses, carrying more money than they'd ever held, and a plan that might get them killed. When they crested this final ridge and saw the ranch in the valley below, Ethan felt something twist in his chest. It still looked half dead, still needed a dozen repairs. But it was home, and for the first time in years, it felt like something worth fighting for. They were 100 yards from the house when Ethan saw the man sitting on the porch. Hank Mercer, his neighbor, stood up as they approached. His face was grim. "Hank," Ethan called, trying to keep his voice casual. "What brings you by?" "Wish it was a social call." Hank walked out to meet them as they dismounted. "But we got problems." "What kind of problems?" "The kind with lawyers and foreclosure notices." Hank pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Banks calling in debts. Not just yours, everybody's. Every small rancher in the valley got one of these yesterday. Payment in full within 30 days, or they take the land." Ethan felt the blood drain from his face. "That's not legal. We've got payment schedules. Schedules they're voiding. Says right here they have the right to demand full payment if they deem the loans at risk." Hank handed over the notice. "And suddenly, they deem every small ranch in the valley at risk." Lydia took the paper, read it quickly. Her jaw tightened. "Vance." "What about him?" Hank asked. "He's behind this. Has to be. He couldn't stop us on the trail, so now he's using the bank to crush us."
She looked at Ethan. "The bank president, Thomas Crow, he and Vance are old friends. I should have seen this coming." "Can we fight it?" Ethan asked. "Not in court. Not in 30 days." She folded the notice, her mind already working. "But we can do what we planned. Rally the other ranchers. Make a collective drive. If we can pool resources, we might generate enough cash to satisfy the bank."
Hank frowned. "That's a hell of a gamble." "It's the only gamble we've got," Ethan said. "You in?" Hank looked between them, these 2 desperate people who'd just driven cattle through hell and somehow survived. Then he nodded. "Yeah, I'm in, and I know others who will be too. People are tired of getting pushed around." "Then let's push back," Lydia said. They spent the next week riding to every small ranch in the valley. Some people slammed doors in their faces. Others listened but were too scared to commit. But slowly, painfully, they built a coalition. Hank Mercer and his 3 sons. Old Tom Crawford, who'd been ranching these hills since before the war. The widow Sarah Jennings, who ran her dead husband's spread with an iron fist and a sharp tongue. The Martinez family, who everyone else ignored because they spoke Spanish first and English second. By the end of the week, they had commitments from 18 ranchers representing over 200 head of cattle. They met in Hank's barn on a Sunday evening. 23 people crowded around a makeshift table, suspicious and desperate in equal measure. Lydia stood at the head of the table, a hand-drawn map spread out in front of her. "The plan is simple," she said. "We pool our herds, make one big drive to Helena, split the costs, split the profits proportionally based on how many head each of you contributes. We move fast, we move together, and we don't sell to Vance." "He'll try to stop us," Tom Crawford said. His voice was a rasp from too many years of tobacco. "Like he tried to stop you?" "Probably. But there's 18 of us now. We can hire outriders, scouts. We can defend ourselves." Lydia met his eyes. "And every day we wait, we get closer to foreclosure." "How much will this cost?" Sarah Jennings asked. She was a thin woman with gray hair and eyes that could cut glass. "I've got maybe $50 to my name. We estimate $300 total for the drive. That's supplies, hired help, emergency funds. If we all pitch in proportionally—" "I can't afford proportionally," one of the younger ranchers interrupted. His name was Jim Parker, barely 20, trying to hold on to his father's land. "I've got 8 cattle and $12. That's it." "Then you contribute what you can," Ethan said.
This isn't about bleeding people dry. It's about survival.
Easy for you to say, someone muttered. You just came back from Helena with pockets full of cash.
The room shifted, hostile. Ethan felt it like a physical thing, the resentment, the suspicion. These people had been stepped on so long they didn't trust anyone, even people trying to help. Lydia's voice cut through the murmur. We made $420 on that drive. We spent $80 on the trip. We owe the bank $600. That means we're still $300 in the hole, same as the rest of you. She pulled out their money, slapped it on the table. Here, $340. Every penny we have. I'll put it toward the collective fund. Silence. Everyone stared at the money. You're betting everything on this, Sarah said slowly. Yes, because it's the only bet worth making. Lydia looked around the room. You can sit here and wait for Vance to take your land piece by piece, or you can fight back. Your choice. One by one, they started nodding, reaching into pockets, pulling out crumpled bills and coins. Jim Parker contributed his $12. Sarah Jennings put in $40. Hank Mercer matched Lydia's $300. By the time they were done, they had $800 in the middle of the table. When do we leave? Hank asked. 3 days, Lydia said. We round up the herds, organize supplies, hire 2 good scouts who know the trail. Then we move. What about Vance? Let him come, Ethan said. We're done running. The next 3 days were chaos. Cattle gathered from 18 different ranches, all mixing together in Hank's largest pasture. Arguments over who owned which steer. Horses traded or borrowed. Supplies packed and repacked. Lydia ran it like a military operation, keeping lists, assigning tasks, settling disputes with a combination of logic and stubbornness that left grown men backing down. Ethan worked alongside her, amazed. This was what she was built for. Not survival, not just endurance, but command. She saw the whole picture, anticipated problems before they happened, turned chaos into order through sheer force of will. On the second day, a rider came from town. Not one of theirs. A stranger, well-dressed, riding a horse too expensive for these parts. He asked for Ethan by name. Ethan met him in the yard, Lydia beside him. Help you? Message from Mr. Vance. The rider handed over a sealed envelope. Ethan opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 3 sentences written in precise script. This is your last warning. Abandon this foolish plan and I will personally arrange extensions on your bank loans. Proceed, and I will destroy every person involved. Below it, Vance's signature. Ethan handed it to Lydia. She read it, face expressionless. Then she tore it in half. Tell Vance, she said to the rider, that we'll see him in hell. The rider blinked. Ma'am, I don't think... Tell him, she repeated, ice in her voice. The man nodded, turned his horse, rode away fast. Hank, who'd been watching from the barn, walked over. That was a declaration of war. War was already declared, Lydia said. We're just making it official. They drove out before dawn on the 4th day. 230 head of cattle, 23 people, and a prayer that they'd live to see Helena. They'd hired 2 scouts, brothers named Cole and Ben Hartman, who knew every trail in the territory. Rough men, but competent. They rode ahead, checking the route, watching for trouble. The drive started smooth. Too smooth. Everyone kept waiting for something to go wrong, but the first day passed without incident. So did the second. By the 3rd day, people were starting to relax, talk about what they'd do with their share of the money. Ethan didn't relax. Neither did Lydia. They rode the edges of the herd, eyes always moving, hands never far from their weapons. It's too quiet, Lydia said on the 4th evening as they made camp. Maybe Vance backed down. No. He's planning something big. She stared into the fire. He can't let us succeed. If we do, his whole empire in this valley collapses. He has to stop us. How? I don't know, but it'll be soon. She was right. The attack came just before dawn on the 5th day. Ethan was on watch, circling the camp, when he heard it. Hoofbeats. Lots of them. Coming fast. He opened his mouth to shout a warning just as gunfire erupted from the tree line. The camp exploded into chaos. People scrambling for weapons, horses screaming, cattle starting to stampede. Ethan fired blindly toward the muzzle flashes, saw a man fall, kept firing. Lydia was suddenly beside him, rifle in hand. How many? 10, maybe more. We need to get the cattle moving or we'll lose them all. We need to survive first.
More gunfire. One of the younger ranchers, Jim Parker, went down clutching his shoulder. Sarah Jennings was returning fire from behind a wagon, cursing like a sailor. The Hartman brothers were trying to rally people, get them organized, but it was chaos. Then Ethan saw him. Cornelius Vance, sitting on his black horse at the edge of the tree line, watching. Not participating, just watching, making sure his hired guns did the job. Something in Ethan snapped. He ran toward the horses, grabbed his gelding's reins, swung into the saddle. Lydia shouted after him, but he ignored her, kicked the horse into a gallop straight toward Vance. Gunfire whined past his head. His horse stumbled, recovered. He kept going, rifle across the saddle, focused on that one target. Vance saw him coming. His eyes widened. He wheeled his horse, started to flee, but Ethan was faster. He caught up, drove his horse into Vance's, sent both animals stumbling. Vance fell, hit the ground hard. Ethan was off his horse before Vance could stand, rifle pointed at his head. "Call them off," Ethan said. "Go to hell." Ethan fired. The bullet kicked up dirt 2 inches from Vance's face. "Call them off, or the next one goes through your skull." Vance's face was white. He looked past Ethan at his hired guns, still firing at the camp. Then he shouted, "Stand down! Stand down!" The gunfire stuttered, stopped. Silence fell, broken only by the sound of cattle moving and people moaning. Lydia rode up, her rifle trained on the gunmen. Behind her, the other ranchers were emerging from cover, weapons ready. They outnumbered the hired guns now, and everyone knew it. "Drop your weapons," Lydia ordered, slowly. The gunmen hesitated. But with Vance on the ground and their employer disarmed, they didn't have much choice. One by one, they dropped their guns. Ethan hauled Vance to his feet. The man was shaking, his expensive suit covered in dirt, all his polish and power gone, reduced to just another scared man. "You're finished," Ethan said. "You can't prove anything," Vance spat. "It's my word against yours." "We've got 20 witnesses who just watched you lead an armed attack on a legal cattle drive." Lydia rode closer. "That's not a business dispute. That's attempted murder. The territorial marshal will love this." "The marshal is a friend of mine." "Not anymore." She smiled, cold as winter. "Because Margaret Shaw from the Helena Independent is riding with us. Has been since yesterday, and she just watched everything." She pointed to the back of the camp, where a middle-aged woman was scribbling in a notebook, her face fierce with concentration. Vance's face went gray. "Here's what's going to happen," Lydia continued. "You're going to ride back to Salvation Ridge. You're going to go to the bank and tell Thomas Crow to void those foreclosure notices. All of them. And you're going to release every rancher in this valley from their contracts." "I'll do no such thing." Ethan pressed the rifle barrel against Vance's chest. "You'll do exactly that. Because if you don't, we'll take you to Helena in chains and let the marshal sort it out. And even if you buy your way out of jail, the newspaper story will destroy you. Every rancher in Montana will know what you did. Your reputation will be finished." Vance looked around, at the armed ranchers, at the journalist writing everything down, at the hired guns who'd already abandoned him. He was beaten, and he knew it. "Fine," he said finally. "I'll do it." "Smart choice." Lydia nodded to Hank. "Tie him up. We'll bring him to town ourselves. Make sure he keeps his word." They bound Vance's hands, put him on his horse under guard. The hired guns they stripped of weapons and let go with a warning. Come back and they'd face charges. They scattered like roaches. Jim Parker's shoulder wound was bad, but not fatal. Sarah Jennings patched him up with whiskey and needle and thread while he bit down on a leather strap and tried not to scream. They'd lost a few cattle in the confusion, but most of the herd was still intact. As the sun rose, they counted their people. 23 went into the fight. 23 came out, wounded, shaken, but alive. Margaret Shaw walked over to where Ethan and Lydia stood surveying the damage. "Hell of a story," she said. "You really going to print it?" Ethan asked. "Every word. This is going to be front page across the territory." She grinned. "You two just became famous. Hope you're ready for that." Lydia looked at Ethan. He shrugged. "Too late to back out now." They drove into Helena 4 days later with Vance in tow and Margaret Shaw's story already circulating through town. People lined the streets to watch. The ranchers who'd stood up to corruption, who'd fought back and won. It should have felt triumphant. Mostly, Ethan just felt tired. They sold the cattle for top price, $62 a head. The buyers knew the story, knew what they represented. It added value. Total take was $14,260. After expenses, each rancher got back roughly 3 times what they'd invested. More than enough to pay their debts, keep their land, start rebuilding. Ethan and Lydia's share was $900. Combined with what they'd made before, it was enough to pay the bank in full with money left over. They stood outside the bank, staring at the building like it might bite them. "We're really going to do this," Ethan said. "Actually pay it off." "Feels strange, doesn't it?" Lydia smiled. "Being free." They walked in together. Thomas Crow, the bank president, looked like he'd aged 10 years in a week. He processed their payment without meeting their eyes, stamped "paid in full" on their account ledger, handed them the deed to their land. Free and clear. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky orange and gold. Ethan held the deed in his hands, still not quite believing it was real. "What now?" he asked. Lydia took his arm. "Now we go home, and we build something that lasts." They rode back to the ranch under stars so bright they hurt to look at. The land was still harsh, still unforgiving, but it was theirs, truly theirs. No bank, no debt, no one to answer to except themselves. When they reached the house, Lydia stopped at the door. "I want to tell you something." "All right. When you bought me at that auction, I thought I was choosing survival over dignity, settling for whatever scraps life would give me." She looked at him. "But you gave me something I never expected. A partnership. A chance to be more than property, more than someone's burden. You gave me a choice. You earned that yourself. Maybe, but you made it possible." She hesitated, then said, "I know this marriage wasn't real when it started, just a transaction. But if you're willing, I'd like it to be real now, not because we have to, but because we want to." Ethan's throat felt tight. This woman who'd killed for him, fought beside him, saved him in every way a person could be saved, who'd taken his $2 gamble and turned it into something worth more than money could measure. "Yeah," he said, "I'd like that too." She kissed him. Soft at first, then harder, years of loneliness and desperation and survival pouring into that one moment. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were shaking. "Come on," she said, taking his hand. "Let's go inside. We've got a future to build." They walked through the door together, leaving the past behind. Whatever came next, drought or prosperity, peace or trouble, they'd face it the same way they'd faced everything else. Together. The victory lasted exactly 3 weeks. 3 weeks of quiet mornings and honest work. 3 weeks of rebuilding fences, replanting fields, and sleeping without wondering if armed men would come in the night. 3 weeks of Ethan and Lydia learning to be married, not the legal fiction they'd started with, but the real thing. Awkward and uncertain and occasionally wonderful. Then the first letter arrived. Ethan found it nailed to the barn door on a Tuesday morning. No signature, just 6 words scrawled in angry black ink. "You should have taken the deal." He brought it to Lydia, who was in the kitchen working through the ranch ledgers she'd started keeping. She read it once, set it down, went back to her numbers. "Just intimidation," she said. "Vance trying to get the last word." "You sure?" "What else can he do? We broke him. The newspaper ran 3 more stories. Half his contracts got voided. He's lost credibility across the territory." She looked up. "He's finished." Ethan wanted to believe her, but that night he checked the rifle twice before bed and slept with one ear open. The second letter came a week later. This one was found by Hank Mercer, nailed to a fence post on the boundary between their properties. "The debt is unpaid. Collection will come." Hank brought it over that evening, his face troubled. "You think this is still Vance?" "Who else?" Ethan said. "I don't know, but that phrasing, 'the debt is unpaid,' that's not how Vance talks. He's a businessman, uses businessman words. This sounds like something else." Lydia studied the letter under lamplight. "The handwriting's different from the first one. Look, the first one was all capitals, angry, rushed. This one's precise, controlled." She set it down. "We might have more than one enemy." "Great," Ethan muttered. "That's just what we need." Over the next 2 weeks, more letters appeared. Nailed to trees, stuck under rocks, left on doorsteps across the valley. Always the same message in different variations. Always unsigned. The ranchers who'd been part of the collective drive started getting nervous, looking over their shoulders, jumping at shadows. Then the accident started. First, it was Tom Crawford's barn, burned to the ground in the middle of the night. No explanation, no witnesses. Tom swore he'd banked the fire before bed, but the whole structure went up like kindling. He lost half his winter feed and nearly lost his life when a beam collapsed. 2 days later, Sarah Jennings found 3 of her cattle dead in the pasture. Poison, the vet said, strychnine in the water trough. Jim Parker, the young rancher who'd been shot during the attack, woke one morning to find his fence cut and his small herd scattered across 3 counties. Took him a week to round them up, and he lost 2 head to wolves in the meantime. The valley started to feel like it had during the worst of the drought. Everyone isolated, everyone afraid, everyone waiting for the next disaster. Ethan and Lydia called a meeting at their ranch. Same group who'd made the drive, minus the ones too scared to come. They gathered in the barn on a cold November evening, maybe 15 people instead of the original 23. "This has to stop," Hank said. He looked older than he had a month ago, worn down. "We can't keep losing stock and buildings. Winter's coming. We need to be preparing, not defending." "It's Vance," someone said. "Has to be." "I don't think so," Lydia said. All eyes turned to her. "I went to Helena last week, talked to people who know Vance's situation. He's ruined, financially, politically, socially. He's trying to sell his holdings and leave the territory before his creditors catch up with him. He doesn't have the resources or the motivation for this." "Then who?" Sarah Jennings demanded. "I think," Lydia said carefully, "it's someone we hurt worse than we realized. Someone who lost more than money when we broke Vance's monopoly." "The bank," Ethan said suddenly. "Thomas Crow." Lydia nodded. Crow was getting kickbacks from Vance for steering loans and controlling foreclosures. When we exposed Vance, we exposed that relationship. Crow lost his income stream and his reputation. The Territorial Banking Commission is investigating him. "So he's what? Getting revenge?" Hank shook his head. "That's insane. Men do insane things when they're cornered." Lydia pulled out a folder of papers she'd been compiling. "I've been digging into Crow's background. He's not just a banker. Before he came to Montana, he worked as an enforcer for mining companies in Colorado. Broke strikes, intimidated workers, burned out claim jumpers. He's got a history of violence." The room went quiet. "If that's true," Tom Crawford said slowly, "then we're in real danger. Vance was a businessman. He'd push until it wasn't profitable anymore, then back off. But a man with a grudge, that's different. That doesn't end until someone's dead." "So what do we do?" Jim Parker asked. He was barely holding it together, Ethan could see, too young for this kind of pressure. "We go to the law," someone suggested. "And tell them what?" Lydia said. "We've got unsigned letters and accidents with no proof. The territorial marshal is 100 miles away and doesn't care about our problems. The local sheriff is in Crow's pocket, has been for years. Then we're on our own." "We've always been on our own," Ethan said. "But we survived Vance. We can survive this too." "How?" Sarah asked. "Wait around for our barns to burn and our cattle to die? No, we go on the offensive." Lydia stood, walked to the map she'd pinned on the barn wall. "Crow's smart, but he's also cautious. He won't do his own dirty work. He's hiring people, thugs, drifters, men who'll commit arson and poisoning for a few dollars. If we can catch one of them, make them talk, we can connect it back to Crow." "That's a big if," Hank said. "You got a better idea?" No one did. They set up a watch rotation. 2 people per ranch per night, rotating every few hours. It was exhausting work on top of the regular ranch duties, but no one complained. Fear was a better motivator than money. For Ethan and Lydia, it meant even less sleep than usual. They split the night shifts, 2 hours on, 2 hours off, until dawn. During his watches, Ethan would circle the property with the rifle, checking the barn, the corral, the house, looking for anything out of place. Most nights, there was nothing, just cold wind and darkness and his own paranoia. But on the 4th night of watches, he found something. Fresh boot prints near the water trough. Not his boots, not Lydia's, too big, too deep. Someone heavy, moving carefully. The prints led from the tree line to the trough, then back again. Ethan's blood went cold. He checked the water, saw nothing unusual, but that didn't mean anything. Poison could be colorless, odorless. He woke Lydia immediately. "Don't let the cattle drink," he said. "We need to test this." They took a bucket of the water to old Doc Harrison in town, the only person they trusted who knew anything about chemistry. He tested it while they waited, using drops of different solutions, watching for reactions. Strychnine, he confirmed. Enough to kill 20 head if they'd drunk their fill. Can you testify to that? Lydia asked. I can, but it won't prove who put it there. It's a start. They dumped the water, scrubbed the trough, refilled it from the well. Then they set a trap. That night, Ethan took the first watch as usual. But instead of circling the property, he hid in the barn loft with a clear view of the trough. Lydia was in the house, armed and ready. They'd agreed. If someone came, they'd catch them alive if possible, dead if necessary. Midnight came and went, 1 in the morning, 2. Ethan's eyes burned from staring into the darkness. His hands were numb from the cold. He was starting to think no one would come. Then he saw movement. A figure emerged from the tree line, walking slowly, carrying something. Ethan's heart hammered. He raised the rifle, sighted down the barrel, waiting for the person to get closer. The figure reached the trough, knelt beside it, pulled out a bottle, started to pour. Don't move, Ethan called out. Drop it and put your hands up. The figure froze. For a moment, Ethan thought they might comply. Then the person bolted, running back toward the trees. Ethan fired a warning shot over their head. I said don't move! The figure kept running. Ethan cursed, climbed down from the loft as fast as he could, started chasing. But the person had a head start and knew the terrain. By the time Ethan reached the tree line, they were gone. He searched for an hour but found nothing, just boot prints and broken branches and the dropped bottle, which turned out to be full of the same poison Doc Harrison had identified. When he got back to the house, Lydia was waiting. Did you get them? No, they ran. He slammed the bottle down on the table. But we've got evidence now. Proof someone's poisoning our stock. Evidence doesn't matter without someone to connect it to. She picked up the bottle, examined it. This is from the general store in town, same type they sell to anyone who asks. Could be anyone. Then what do? We keep watching, and next time we don't give them a chance to run. But there was no next time. Whoever had been sabotaging them got smart, went quiet. A week passed with no incidents. Then 2 weeks. The watch rotation continued, but people were getting tired, making mistakes, falling asleep on duty. Ethan was starting to wonder if maybe they'd scared off whoever was behind it. Then Jim Parker's ranch house burned down with him inside. They found out at dawn when Jim's hired hand came riding up, horse half dead from the hard run, the kid barely coherent. Fire, he kept saying. The whole house. Jim was sleeping. He couldn't. Ethan and Lydia rode over immediately. By the time they arrived, there was nothing left but smoking ruins and the smell of burned wood and worse things. The other ranchers were already there, standing in a silent circle, staring at the wreckage. Jim Parker had been 20 years old, trying to hold on to his father's dream, and now he was dead. Sarah Jennings was the first to speak. This wasn't an accident. No, Hank said quietly. It wasn't. Then what are we going to do about it? Her voice was sharp with grief and rage. Keep watching, keep waiting. How many more of us have to die before we act? We've been trying to act, Tom Crawford said, but we can't prove anything. Then we stop trying to prove it legally and handle it ourselves. Sarah turned to face the group. We know it's Crow. Everyone knows it's Crow, so we go to him, directly. Make him stop. Make him how? Someone asked. However we have to. A murmur went through the crowd. Half agreement, half fear. They were good people mostly, law-abiding, the kind who wanted to believe the system would work if they just played by the rules. But the rules had failed them, and now a kid was dead. If we go after Crow without proof, we're no better than he is, Ethan said. But even as he said it, he wasn't sure he believed it anymore. Better than him? Sarah's laugh was bitter. He's killing us, burning us out, and we're supposed to be better than that? When does being better get us anything except dead? Lydia stepped forward. She's right. We need to confront Crow, but not with violence, with evidence we force him to give us. How? Hank asked. We make him think he's won, that we're broken, ready to give up. Then we get close, record a confession, bring it to someone who can't be bought. She looked around the circle. It's risky, but it's the only way to end this that doesn't make us into murderers. They voted. It was close, but Lydia's plan won out, barely. The next day, Ethan went to the bank alone. Thomas Crow sat behind his big desk like nothing had changed, like he wasn't responsible for a kid burning to death. He looked up when Ethan entered, and something like satisfaction crossed his face. "Mr. Cross, to what do I owe the pleasure?" "I'm here to negotiate," Ethan said. He'd practiced this, going over the words with Lydia until they sounded natural. "We both know what's happening in the valley. We both know it's not going to stop unless someone backs down. I'm sure I don't know what you mean." "Cut the act. You want us gone, we want to survive. There has to be a middle ground." Crow leaned back in his chair, studying him. "Go on." "The collective drive, the cooperation between ranchers, it's falling apart. Jim Parker's death scared people. They're ready to quit." Ethan forced his voice to sound defeated. "I'm ready to quit. Just want to know what it'll cost." "Cost?" Crow smiled. "Why would it cost anything?" "Because you're a businessman. Everything has a price." Ethan put a folded paper on the desk. "That's a contract. Gives you exclusive buying rights for my cattle, same as Vance had. Below market rates, all profits go to you. In exchange, the accidents stop." Crow picked up the contract, read it slowly. "Interesting, but why would I sign this when I could simply wait for you to fail on your own? Because if I sign this, the others will follow. You'll have the valley locked down again, legal and clean. No more mess, no more risk." Ethan met his eyes. "But I need to know it's really you I'm dealing with, that you have the power to make it stop." "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Then I guess we're done here." Ethan stood to leave. "Wait." Crow's voice stopped him. "Sit down, Mr. Cross." Ethan sat. Crow studied him for a long moment. Then he said, "You're right. I do have the power to make it stop, because I'm the one who started it." There it was, the confession they needed. Ethan's hand moved slowly toward his coat pocket, where the small recording device Lydia had acquired from a traveling salesman was hidden. A wax cylinder, supposedly capable of capturing sound. They'd paid $50 for it, nearly everything they had left. "Why?" Ethan asked, trying to keep Crow talking while the cylinder turned. "Vance was the one we went after." Vance was a fool. An arrogant, greedy fool who thought he could control an entire valley through contracts and intimidation. Crow's voice was cold. "I was the one who made it work. I controlled the money, the foreclosures, the leverage. Vance just collected the profits. When you destroyed him, you destroyed my entire operation. Years of careful work, gone, because a bunch of dirt farmers decided to play hero. So you killed a kid." "I eliminated a problem. Jim Parker was weak, easy to target. His death was supposed to break your spirit, send a message that resistance is futile." Crow shrugged. Apparently it worked. Ethan felt rage burning in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "If I sign this, you'll stop. No more fires, no more poisonings. Sign it and convince the others to sign theirs. And yes, the accidents will stop." Crow smiled. "I'll have everything I had before, and you'll have the privilege of surviving. For now." "For now? Did you think this was about money, Mr. Cross? This is about power. Control. Once I have you all under contract again, I can squeeze whenever I want. Raise prices, foreclose on whims, drive you out one by one." He leaned forward. "You should have stayed small, stayed quiet. But you had to be heroes. And now you'll spend the rest of your lives paying for it." "That's what you think," Ethan said quietly, standing up. He pulled the recording device from his pocket, showed Crow the slowly turning cylinder. "But I think you just confessed to murder." Crow's face went white. "That's not legal." "It is under the new territorial evidence laws. Any recording made with intent to document criminal activity is admissible in court." Lydia's voice came from the doorway. She walked in, followed by Sheriff Palmer and 2 deputies. "We checked, thoroughly. Palmer looked sick. He'd been in Crow's pocket for years. Everyone knew it. But he was also a coward, and the look on his face said he knew which way the wind was blowing." "Thomas Crow," Palmer said, voice shaking. "You're under arrest for the murder of Jim Parker and conspiracy to commit arson, poisoning, and extortion." Crow stood up fast, knocking his chair back. "You can't prove any of that." "We just did.
Lydia said. She held up the cylinder. Your own words. And we've got 3 witnesses who heard everything. The deputies moved forward. Crow looked around wildly, like he might try to run, but there was nowhere to go. They cuffed him, and the sight of it, this powerful man reduced to a criminal in chains, sent a cold satisfaction through Ethan's veins. As they let him out, Crow turned back. This won't hold up. I'll hire lawyers, delay the trial, find a judge who... The territorial prosecutor is already on his way, Lydia interrupted, along with a federal marshal. Jim Parker wasn't just a rancher. He was the son of a Union veteran. That makes his murder a federal case. She smiled. You're going to trial, Mr. Crow, and you're going to hang. The color drained from Crow's face. They dragged him out. In the sudden silence of the empty office, Ethan and Lydia looked at each other. We did it, he said. We got him. But it doesn't bring Jim back. No, it doesn't. They walked out of the bank together into bright afternoon sunlight. The other ranchers were waiting outside. Hank, Sarah, Tom, all of them. When they saw Ethan and Lydia emerge, someone asked, Well? We got him, Lydia said. He confessed. It's over. The relief was visible. People sagging like puppets with cut strings, tears on weather-beaten faces, hands clasped in silent gratitude. But there was grief, too. Victory didn't erase what they'd lost. That night, they held a memorial for Jim Parker. Simple and quiet, out on the land he'd died trying to save. Someone said a few words about his father, about dreams and sacrifice. Sarah Jennings sang an old hymn that made everyone cry, even the men who pretended they weren't. Afterward, as people were leaving, Tom Crawford pulled Ethan aside. You and Lydia, you saved us. You know that, right? We just did what needed doing. No. You did more than that. You showed us we could fight back, that we didn't have to accept being victims. Tom gripped his shoulder. This valley's different now, better, because of you two. Ethan didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. As fall turned to winter, life slowly returned to something like normal. Crow's trial was set for spring. The valley ranchers started cooperating more, sharing resources, helping with repairs. The collective drive had proven the concept. Now they formed a proper cooperative, with bylaws and elected officers and plans for the future. Lydia threw herself into organizing it. She drew up articles of incorporation, negotiated with suppliers, even started talks with the railroad about building a spur line to the valley. She worked 18-hour days, barely sleeping, driven by something Ethan couldn't quite name. One night, he found her at the kitchen table long after midnight, surrounded by papers, eyes red from exhaustion. Come to bed, he said gently. I need to finish this proposal for... It can wait until morning. No, it can't. If we don't get the railroad deal finalized before spring, we'll lose another season to the middlemen and... She stopped, rubbed her eyes. I need to keep working. Why? Because if I stop, I'll think about Jim, about how we were too slow, too cautious, about how a kid died because I didn't act fast enough. Ethan pulled up a chair, sat across from her. Jim died because Crow was a murderer, not because of anything you did or didn't do. I should have seen it coming, should have known Crow was the real threat. You can't predict everything, Lydia. You're not all powerful. Then what good am I? Her voice cracked. I'm supposed to be the smart one, the one who sees the patterns, anticipates the problems. And I failed. You saved this valley, saved all of us. But not him. She was crying now, silently, tears running down her face. Not Jim. Ethan reached across the table, took her hands in his. Listen to me. You're the strongest, smartest, most capable person I've ever met. You've done more good in 6 months than most people do in a lifetime. But you can't save everyone. You're human, and being human means sometimes you fail, even when you do everything right. I hate failing. I know, but that's what makes you human. And I'd rather have a human partner who cares this much than a perfect one who doesn't. She squeezed his hands, held on tight. They sat like that for a long time, in the quiet kitchen with the lamp burning low. Outside, the wind howled, but inside it was warm. Eventually, Lydia stood up, left the papers on the table, and let Ethan lead her to bed. They lay in the darkness, holding each other, two broken people who'd somehow made each other whole. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For seeing me. The real me. not just what I can do. Always, he said.
They fell asleep like that, tangled together, and for the first time in weeks, neither of them had nightmares.
Winter came hard that year. 3 feet of snow by December, temperatures so cold the water froze in the well. But the ranch was prepared. They had enough feed for the cattle, enough firewood for the stove, enough food to last until spring. The other ranchers were prepared too, thanks to the cooperative's shared resources.
It was, Ethan thought, the first winter in years where he wasn't afraid of what was coming. On Christmas Eve, they hosted a gathering at their ranch. Nothing fancy, just neighbors coming together, sharing food and warmth and stories. Sarah Jennings brought venison stew. Hank Mercer had whiskey. Tom Crawford told jokes that made everyone groan. The Martinez family taught them a card game that ended with everyone laughing and accusing each other of cheating. Late in the evening, after most people had gone home, Hank pulled Ethan aside. "Got something for you," he said, handing over a small box wrapped in brown paper. "You didn't have to. Just open it." Inside were 2 silver coins, the same 2 coins Ethan had spent at the auction to buy Lydia. "How did you—" "I was at that auction, saw the whole thing. After it was over, I bought these from the auctioneer for $4. Figured they might mean something someday." Hank smiled. "I was right." Ethan stared at the coins, emotion tightening his throat. Thank you for showing us how to fight, how to win." After everyone left, Ethan showed the coins to Lydia. She held them in her palm, these small pieces of silver that had changed everything. $2, she said softly. "That's what I was worth. That's what I had, not what you were worth." "You know what I mean." "I do, but look at us now. Look at what we built." He closed her hand around the coins. "These aren't a reminder of how little you were worth. They're proof of how much we can become when we refuse to accept the world's valuation." She smiled, kissed him. "Keep them safe. Someday we'll tell our children this story." "Our children? Not yet. But someday." She put the coins in a small wooden box Ethan had made, set it on the mantel. "When we're ready." That night they lay in bed listening to the wind howl outside their warm house, on their land that no one could take from them, and talked about the future. Real plans, real dreams, the kind you make when you believe tomorrow will actually come. And for the first time in either of their lives, they did believe it. Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it brought change with it. The trial of Thomas Crow began on the first Monday of April. The whole valley emptied out as ranchers made the journey to Helena to watch justice finally get served. Ethan and Lydia rode in with Hank and Sarah, the 4 of them quiet as they traveled, each lost in their own thoughts about what the trial meant. The courthouse was packed. Every seat filled, people standing in the aisles, more crowded outside the windows trying to hear. Crow sat at the defendant's table in an expensive suit that couldn't hide how much smaller he looked now. Without his power, without his bank and his connections, he was just another scared man facing the rope. The prosecutor was a sharp woman named Catherine Wells who'd come all the way from the territorial capital. She presented the evidence methodically, the recorded confession, witness testimonies, financial records showing payments to the men who'd set fires and poisoned cattle. She painted a picture of a man so consumed by greed and spite that he'd murdered a kid to protect his profits. Crow's lawyers tried everything, argued the recording was inadmissible, that the confession was coerced, that there was no direct evidence linking him to Jim Parker's death. But the jury wasn't buying it. You could see it in their faces, farmers and merchants and working men who'd spent their lives under the thumbs of people like Crow. They knew guilt when they saw it. The verdict came on the 3rd day. Guilty on all counts. Crow's face went white as the judge read the sentence. Death by hanging, to be carried out within 60 days. He tried to stand, to say something, but his legs gave out and he collapsed back into his chair. The deputies had to drag him out while he sobbed. Outside the courthouse, Ethan found Lydia standing apart from the celebrating crowd, staring at nothing. "You all right?" he asked. "I thought I'd feel better, watching him get sentenced." She looked at him. "But I just feel tired and sad. Jim's still dead. Crow hanging won't change that." "No, but it means he can't hurt anyone else." "I know, and that matters. It just doesn't feel like enough." She took a breath. "Come on, let's go home." They rode back to the valley through spring rains that turned the trails to mud. It should have felt like a triumph, the villain defeated, justice served. But mostly it just felt like the end of a long, exhausting fight where everyone lost something. The ranch was waiting for them, and so was the work. Spring meant calving season, planting, repairs from winter damage. Ethan threw himself into it, grateful for the simple clarity of physical labor. Fix the fence, mend the roof, help a cow birth a calf. Problems that had solutions, work that showed results. Lydia divided her time between the ranch and the cooperative. The organization had grown beyond anyone's expectations. 32 member ranches now, with more wanting to join. They'd negotiated contracts with 3 different buyers, eliminating the need for any middleman. The railroad deal was moving forward. What had started as a desperate gamble was becoming something real and lasting. But success brought new problems. Arguments over how to split profits, disputes about who contributed what, accusations of favoritism. Running the cooperative turned out to be almost as hard as fighting Vance had been, just in different ways. One evening in late May, Lydia came home looking more exhausted than Ethan had ever seen her. "Bad day?" he asked. "Tom Crawford and the Martinez family are threatening to quit the cooperative. Tom says the profit split isn't fair, that his larger operation should get a bigger percentage. The Martinez family says Tom's trying to recreate the same hierarchy we fought to destroy." She dropped into a chair. "And they're both right, in their own way." "What'd you tell them?" "That we'd discuss it at the next meeting, vote on a new profit structure." She rubbed her temples. "But I'm tired of mediating disputes, tired of trying to make everyone happy when everyone wants different things. Maybe you shouldn't be trying to make everyone happy. Maybe you should just be trying to make it fair." "Fair according to who?" "Tom thinks fair means bigger operations get bigger rewards. The Martinez family thinks fair means equal shares regardless of size. Sarah thinks fair means basing it on need. Bigger families get more." Lydia looked at him. "They're all reasonable positions. How do I choose?" "You don't. You let them choose. Put it to a vote, abide by the result, and tell anyone who doesn't like it that the door's open." Ethan sat down across from her. "You can't save everyone, remember? You taught me that. Some people are going to leave no matter what you do. Let them." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "When did you get so wise?" "I married a smart woman. Some of it had to rub off eventually. That got a small smile out of her. I'll put it to a vote next week. But if the cooperative falls apart, then we'll still have our ranch, our land, each other." He took her hand. "We survived with nothing before. We can do it again if we have to." "I don't want to have to." "Neither do I. But knowing we can makes the fear a little smaller." The vote happened the following Tuesday. The cooperative members gathered in the church basement in Salvation Ridge, the only building big enough to hold everyone. Lydia presented 3 proposals: Tom's percentage-based split, the Martinez family's equal share model, and a compromise that Sarah had developed that combined elements of both. The debate was heated, voices raised, accusations thrown, old grievances aired. For a while, Ethan thought it might devolve into a fistfight. But Lydia kept control, made everyone speak in turn, forced them to actually listen to each other instead of just waiting for their chance to argue. In the end, Sarah's compromise won by a narrow margin. Not everyone was happy, but enough people could live with it to keep the cooperative intact. Tom Crawford grumbled, but stayed. The Martinez family accepted the result with grace. And Lydia, watching it all come together, finally allowed herself to breathe. "We did it," she said afterward, leaning against Ethan as they walked to their horses. "You did it. I just watched." "No, you kept me sane. That's more important." She kissed his cheek. "Thank you." As summer settled over the valley, life found a rhythm. The cooperative ran itself more and more, needing less direct management from Lydia. The ranch prospered. Their small herd had grown to 20 head, with more calves expected. They'd planted fields of hay and wheat that were coming in thick and green. For the first time since Ethan could remember, the ranch felt abundant instead of desperate. But abundance brought its own complications. In July, a lawyer from Helena arrived with papers. Cornelius Vance had died, drank himself to death in a boarding house, according to the lawyer, and in his will, he'd left everything he still owned to Ethan Cross. "Why?" Ethan asked, staring at the documents. "The will says To the man who beat me fair and square and taught me that honor still exists in this God-forsaken territory. The lawyer shrugged. It's not much. The creditors took most of it. But there's a parcel of land, 40 acres adjoining your property, and about $200 in a bank account in Denver. After the lawyer left, Ethan and Lydia sat on the porch, trying to make sense of it.
He respected you, Lydia said finally, in his own twisted way. You were the opponent who actually beat him instead of just surviving him. I don't want his land. Why not? It's good grazing land, connects to our water source. It would nearly double our range. Because it feels like profiting from someone's death. Ethan, he wanted you to have it, and we could use it. The herd's growing. We'll need more space soon. She looked at him. You can accept something from an enemy and still hate what they did. The two things aren't mutually exclusive. He thought about it for a long time. Finally, he said, All right, we'll take the land, but we use it to expand the cooperative's shared grazing, not just for us. That's a good compromise. The land transfer went through in August. Combined with their original 60 acres, they now controlled one of the larger continuous properties in the valley. It gave them leverage, influence, the kind of power Ethan had never wanted, but was learning to wield carefully. In September, Lydia realized she was pregnant. She'd suspected for a few weeks, but hadn't said anything, not wanting to jinx it. But when Doc Harrison confirmed it, she couldn't keep the secret anymore. She told Ethan that evening as they were finishing dinner. He froze, fork halfway to his mouth. Pregnant? About 3 months. Doc says everything looks normal. We're going to have a baby. Yes. He set down the fork, came around the table, pulled her into his arms. She could feel him shaking. You all right? She asked. I'm terrified, he admitted, and happy, and terrified again. Me too. She held him tight. But we've survived everything else. We can survive this too. This is different. He pulled back, looked at her. What if I'm a terrible father? What if I fail them the way I failed at everything else? You haven't failed. Look around, Ethan. Look at what we built. She took his hand, placed it on her still flat stomach. This child is going to grow up on land we own free and clear, in a valley where people work together instead of tearing each other down, with parents who love each other and fought like hell to make a better world. She smiled. That's not failure, that's success. He kissed her then, soft and wondering, like he was memorizing the moment. The pregnancy changed things in subtle ways. Lydia couldn't ride as much, couldn't lift heavy loads. She hated it at first, fought against the limitations. But gradually she learned to delegate, to let others do the physical work while she focused on planning and organizing. It was hard for someone who'd survived by doing everything herself, but she managed. Ethan became almost obsessively protective. He wouldn't let her near the cattle, insisted she rest every afternoon, fretted over every twinge and ache. It drove her crazy, but she put up with it because she understood where it came from. He'd lost so much in his life. The thought of losing her or the baby terrified him. I'm not made of glass, she told him one evening after he'd stopped her from carrying a basket of laundry. I know, but humor me anyway. You're going to drive yourself insane if you keep this up for 6 more months. Probably, but you're worth it. Winter came again, their second as a married couple. This time, they were ready for it. Food stored, wood split, the house tight against the cold. Lydia spent the long evenings knitting tiny clothes, reading books on childbirth and infant care that Doc Harrison lent her. Ethan made a cradle from pine he'd cut himself, sanding it smooth so there'd be no splinters to hurt tiny hands. On Christmas Eve, they held another gathering. It had become a tradition now, the Valley Ranchers coming together to celebrate survival and community. More people this year, including families who'd moved to the area specifically because of the cooperative's reputation. Sarah Jennings made a toast. To Ethan and Lydia Cross, who taught us that the only thing stronger than greed is people who refuse to quit. Everyone drank to that. And Ethan, looking around the crowded room at all these people who'd become friends and allies, felt something he'd never expected to feel again. Pride. The baby came on a cold March morning, 3 weeks early. Lydia's water broke just after dawn. Ethan rode like hell to fetch Doc Harrison, while Sarah Jennings stayed with Lydia, keeping her calm, boiling water, preparing the bedroom. By the time Ethan got back with the doctor, the contractions were coming hard and fast. The labor lasted 8 hours. Ethan paced outside the bedroom,
listening to Lydia's screams, feeling helpless in a way he hadn't felt since the worst days of drought and debt. Hank showed up at some point, sat with him, didn't say much, but was there. Finally, just as the sun was setting, he heard it, a baby's cry. Sarah opened the door, smiling. "You can come in now." Lydia was propped up in bed, sweaty and exhausted and more beautiful than Ethan had ever seen her. In her arms was a tiny, red-faced, screaming bundle. "It's a girl," she said softly. "We have a daughter." Ethan walked over on shaking legs, looked down at this impossibly small person who hadn't existed this morning and now was the center of his entire world. "Can I hold her?" he asked. Lydia carefully transferred the baby into his arms. She was so light, so fragile. Ethan was terrified he'd drop her or hold her wrong or somehow break this perfect thing, but the moment she settled against his chest, she stopped crying. Just looked up at him with dark eyes that seemed to see right through him. "Hello," he whispered. "I'm your father." "What should we name her?" Lydia asked. They discussed names but never decided. Now, looking at this tiny person who'd fought her way into the world 3 weeks early, Ethan knew. "Hope," he said. "Her name is Hope." Lydia smiled. "Hope Cross. I like it." The first months were brutal. Hope was a terrible sleeper, waking every 2 hours to nurse. Ethan and Lydia took turns walking her around the house at 3 a.m, exhausted and stumbling, wondering how something so small could produce so much noise. The ranch work still needed doing. The cooperative still needed managing. They were stretched thinner than they'd ever been, but they managed. With help from Sarah, who'd raised 5 kids and knew all the tricks. With support from Hank, who brought them meals when they were too tired to cook. With the solidarity of the valley, all these people who'd learned to rely on each other. One evening in late spring, when Hope was 3 months old and finally sleeping through the night, Ethan and Lydia sat on the porch watching the sunset. Hope was in Lydia's arms, drowsing peacefully. "I was thinking," Lydia said, "about that auction, about how you spent your last $2 on a woman nobody wanted. Best money I ever spent. At the time, I thought I was choosing survival, just another form of selling myself to stay alive." She looked down at Hope. "But I was wrong. I wasn't selling myself. I was betting on myself. On us. On the possibility that 2 desperate people could build something better than what the world offered." "Did we?" "Look around, Ethan. Really look." She gestured at the valley spread out before them. "The cooperative serves 43 ranches now. We've got a school starting next month, first one this valley's ever had. The railroad spur is halfway built. People are moving here because they've heard this is a place where you can make an honest living without getting crushed by powerful men." She looked at him. "We change things. Not just for us, but for everyone. You changed things. I just helped." "No, we did it together. That's the whole point." She shifted Hope to her other arm. "Alone, we were nothing. 2 broken people with no power and no prospects. But together, we became something the corrupt couldn't ignore and the powerful couldn't crush." Ethan thought about that. About the journey from that humiliating auction to this porch, this family, this life. It had cost them blood and fear and more sleepless nights than he could count, but it had given them something too. Purpose. Dignity. The knowledge that they'd fought the system and won. "You know what I realized?" he said. "The world measures people by what they're worth. How much money, how much power, how much value they bring. But that's backwards. People aren't worth what they cost. They're worth what they can become when someone gives them a chance. Is that what you think you did? Gave me a chance?" We gave each other chances, every day. Chances to fail, chance to try again, chances to be more than what we were. He looked at her. And we kept taking them. Hope stirred, made a small sound, settled back to sleep. Such a tiny thing, this new life they'd created. But she represented something bigger. Possibility. The future. Proof that broken people could make whole things. Over the next few years, the valley continued to change. The railroad spur was completed, cutting shipping costs in half. The school grew from 1 room to 3. New families arrived, drawn by stories of the cooperative and the community that had fought corruption and won. The population doubled, then tripled. Ethan and Lydia's ranch prospered. Their herd grew to over 100 head. They hired workers, built a bigger barn, added rooms to the house. Money still wasn't abundant, but it was enough. More than enough.
Hope grew into a bright, curious child with her mother's sharp mind and her father's stubbornness. By the time she was 4, she was following Ethan around the ranch, asking questions about everything, demanding to help with chores she was too small for. Lydia taught her to read before she started school, and Hope devoured books like some kids devoured candy. On Hope's 5th birthday, Ethan took down the small wooden box from the mantel. Inside were the 2 silver coins, tarnished now but still bright enough to catch the light. "What are those, Papa?" Hope asked. "These," Ethan said, "are the $2 I used to bring your mother home." "That's all?" $2? "That's all I had." He held them out so she could see. "But sometimes what you have isn't as important as what you do with it." "Mama says you were very brave."
"Your mama's the brave one. I just got lucky."
Lydia came over, ruffled Hope's hair.
"We both got lucky. And we worked hard, those 2 things together. That's what made the difference." Hope studied the coins seriously. "Can I have them?" "Someday," Ethan said, "when you're old enough to understand what they mean." "What do they mean?" "They mean that your worth isn't determined by what others think you're worth. It's determined by what you choose to become." He put the coins back in the box, set it on the mantel. "Remember that, Hope. No matter what anyone tells you, you get to decide your own value." She nodded, solemn. Then she ran off to play, the moment already forgotten in the way of children. But Ethan and Lydia stood there for a while, remembering. The auction block, the desperate drive, the fires and the fear and the fights. All the moments that had brought them here, to this life they'd carved out of hardship and hope. "Do you ever regret it?" Lydia asked. "Spending those $2? "Never, not once." "Even during the hard parts?" "Especially during the hard parts. Because that's when I knew we were building something real." He put his arm around her. "Easy things don't change you. Only the hard things do." As the years passed, their story became legend in the valley. The rancher who'd spent his last $2 on an auction bride, and the woman who'd helped him fight corruption and build a community. People told it to their children, who told it to their children. Details got embellished, facts became fiction, but the core remained true. 2 desperate people who refused to accept the world's judgment of their worth, who fought back against a system designed to crush them. Who won, not because they were special, but because they refused to quit. Ethan lived to see his grandchildren, 4 of them by the time Hope was 25. Lydia lived long enough to see the cooperative expand across 3 territories, becoming a model for farmer organizations across the West. They both lived long enough to see Thomas Crow's execution become a turning point in Montana law, leading to reforms that protected small ranchers and limited monopolistic practices. But more than the public victories, they treasured the private ones. Quiet mornings on the porch, watching Hope grow into a woman as fierce and smart as her mother. The feeling of Lydia's hand in his after 50 years of marriage. The knowledge that they'd built something that would outlast them. When Ethan died at 73, the whole valley came to his funeral. They stood in the rain and told stories about the man who'd shown them how to fight. Lydia, white-haired but still sharp-eyed, thanked them all. Then she went home to the ranch she'd built with her husband, sat in her chair by the fire, and allowed herself to grieve. She lived another 5 years, long enough to see Hope married with children of her own, long enough to finish the memoir she'd been writing, documenting everything they'd done so the truth wouldn't be lost to legend, long enough to make peace with all the parts of her life, the losses and the wins, the failures and the successes. On her last day, with Hope holding her hand, Lydia asked for the wooden box from the mantel. Hope brought it, opened it, showed her the 2 coins inside. "Tell me the story again," Lydia whispered. So Hope did. She told her mother the story of the auction, the desperate gamble, the woman nobody wanted, and the man with nothing to lose. She told her about the cattle drives and the fires, the fights, and the victories. She told her about love built from partnership, and partnership built from respect. When the story was done, Lydia smiled. "It was worth it," she said. "All of it. Every hard moment, because we did it together." Those were her last words. They buried her beside Ethan on a hill overlooking the valley they'd helped build. The funeral was even bigger than his had been. Hundreds of people from across the territory, all coming to pay respects to the woman who'd changed everything. Hope inherited the ranch and the 2 silver coins.
She kept them in the same wooden box on the same mantel her father had made. And when her own children asked about them, she told them the story.
Not the legend that people told in saloons and around campfires. The real story. About two broken people who found each other at the worst moment of their lives and decided to fight instead of surrender. About courage that came from desperation and love that came from partnership. About the simple truth that the world's judgment of your worth means nothing compared to what you choose to become. Years later, long after Hope herself had passed and the ranch had been divided among her children, one of her grandchildren, a historian studying the cooperative movement, found Lydia's memoir in an old trunk. She published it, and suddenly the story that had been legend became history. Professors studied it. Students wrote papers about it. The auction became a symbol of how broken systems could be overturned by ordinary people refusing to accept their assigned place.
But the real legacy wasn't in books or papers. It was in the valley itself, still thriving 100 years later, in the cooperative that had evolved but never died, in the community that valued solidarity over competition, cooperation over conquest, in the understanding passed down through generations that power doesn't come from money or position. It comes from people standing together and refusing to be crushed. And in a small museum in what had once been Salvation Ridge, now a thriving town of 5,000, 2 tarnished silver coins sat in a display case. A plaque beneath them read, $2, the price of a desperate gamble, the beginning of a revolution, proof that courage, loyalty, and partnership can rewrite destiny. Every year, school children visited that museum and heard the story about Ethan and Lydia Cross, about the auction and the drives and the fights, about 2 people the world had thrown away who'd refused to stay discarded. And every year, some of those children went home and looked at their own lives differently, saw possibilities where they'd seen only limitations, found courage where they'd felt only fear, understood that the world's judgment of their worth was just an opinion, not a fact, because that was the real lesson of the $2 bride. Not that you could buy someone's loyalty, not that desperation leads to love, not even that the underdog can win if they fight hard enough. The lesson was simpler and deeper than that. Your value isn't determined by what the world thinks you're worth. It's determined by what you choose to do with whatever you have, however little that might be, by whether you surrender to the system or fight to change it, by whether you let loss break you or use it to build something stronger. 2 silver coins, 2 desperate people, one shared belief that they deserved better than what they'd been given. That was enough. It had always been enough. And that truth, more than anything else Ethan and Lydia Cross left behind, endured.